Welcome to the Finance and Operations Committee meeting of the Board of Education. My name is Raymond Garino. I'm going to call this meeting to order at 6:36, Tuesday, April 10th, 2018, Nashua High School North Boardroom. Going to take roll call first. Mr. Mosher.
I'm here.
Ms. Porter.
Here.
Ms. Van Twyver is an alternate. She's not here. Other attendees are Ms. Dottie Oden, Mr. Donovan, and Mr. Smith. And we also have Lisa Gingras with us. Mr. Mosher is recuperating at home. He's attending this meeting by telephone. Are you all by yourself, Mr. Mosher?
Yes, I am.
Okay, thank you, sir. First on our agenda, we have an Eagle Scout project for Amherst Street School. And we have Mr. Ram Centel. How do you say your last name, sir?
Centel.
Ram Centel. Okay, and Mr. Centel is a Life Scout who has a Eagle Scout project, and that's going to be to construct a raised garden bed at Amherst Street School to accommodate kids with wheelchairs. So, without any further ado, I'm going to let Mr. Centel describe his project.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Ram Centel, and I'm 16 years old from Hollis. I'm doing my Eagle project right now, and it's a garden bed with a keyhole design which will accommodate kids in wheelchairs, kids with less mobility to be able to experience gardening. My plan is to make a garden bed at the Elm Street Elementary School and put it on top of wooden legs, essentially, where it'll be 28 inches off the ground. It'll be using cedar as well as pressure-treated wood for the legs. The bed is 8 feet long by 3. It has a 3-foot depth. It's 8 feet long. Wide. And it has a 6-foot keyhole, allowing for 2 wheelchairs to go in. The estimated project cost is $200. And Mrs. Scarpati said she'd pay for half of the school district would pay for half of the project cost as well as acquire soil. And my plan is to start building as soon as I have approval from the Eagle Board.
Thank you. I just want to open it up to the members. I'm going to start with Mr. Mosher. Do you have any questions, Mr. Mosher?
I don't have any questions right now. I have a comment.
Okay.
As a former scout, I think that it's a worthy project, and I think it looks like it's well thought out, especially to the idea for a raised bed, and the legs apparently are very substantial and should work very well. Have you made any arrangements for obtaining water for the plantings? And what kind of plantings do you expect to have?
I'm sorry, what's that? I didn't understand the question.
What kind of plantings do you have, and did you make any arrangements for water so that the kids can water the plants?
Yeah, sorry. So my plan is for the bottom of the bed, where the dirt will rest. It'll be wood planks and they'll have seams where water can go through it. And I'll also drill holes in the wooden planks. Using wooden planks would allow better stability, and then if I drill holes in it, water can drain through. So. Yeah.
What about access to water? Do they have hoses and things like that so they could water their plants?
I believe so, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry.
Hi. Oop. This is Jen Scarpati, principal at Amherst Street. We do have a water source in our courtyard where this will be hopefully located. And we do have hoses and a watering system that we use to water our other plantings in the courtyard. And because it's a fairly shallow bed, we plan to have shallow rooted plantings for the kiddos to use.
Thank you, Ms. Scarpati. Does anyone else have a question or a comment? Ms. Porter?
I think this plan looks great. The kids are going to love it. You've done a nice job. I noticed that you got free seeds from Strawberry Bank. How did that happen?
I haven't been involved with the plantings.
Oh, you didn't get the seeds?
I didn't get the seeds or the soil. I've just been involved with the actual bed itself.
Is that something you did, Mrs. Scarpati?
Yes, Rom's been working in conjunction with our school garden team, and one of the members of our school garden team, Mrs. Ledoux, had reached out to Strawberry Bank, and they donated a whole bunch of seeds to our project.
Well, that's great. Very nice. All right, thank you. Good idea.
Mrs. Oden, do you have a comment or?
No, I just think it's a great idea to have it for kids in wheelchairs so they can access that. I think that's great, and I'm guessing it's right outside one of the rooms that have students in wheelchairs. So I think it's a wonderful idea, and I wish you good luck. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Smith?
Yes, hi, Rom. So there's no penetrations into the ground, right? This is just floating on top of the ground? You won't be digging into the soil?
Actually, my plan was to have 6 inches dug in. Is that not listed in the?
No, I just, from your diagram, that at least the one I have, it looked like you're putting each of the 4x4s into a concrete block, or not?
No, my plan was to dig 6 inches into the ground for each leg. Each leg is a 4x4 leg, so just dig as much as we need, and then sort of lay the bed in.
The other option we had talked about, and you can certainly weigh in, Mr. Smith, is to put it on top of pavers, which we do have in that area, would be another option.
All
We
right.
just want it to be stable.
Yeah, I prefer not to dig if we don't have to. Then I don't have to call dig safe and things like that. And not that 6 inches is going to make any difference, but yeah. No, it looks good.
Mr. Donovan?
Yeah, I guess my only question, if you dig, is it gonna settle over time and get uneven? Do you think there'll be an issue with that?
But I thought I just heard put it on pavers, and that might be more stable.
Yeah.
I mean, the other thing you can do is like Home Depot, they sell just a concrete form, and the opening it is exactly the dimension for a 4x4. So you just slide the pole into the concrete form, and it doesn't sink. Unless you're building a big shed like I did, and one side did sink a little bit over time. But I learned through hard knocks with that one. But yeah, so that's another way. Instead of buying just a paver, you could get these blocks. I don't think they cost very much. Just another idea.
If there aren't any more questions or comments, I could entertain a motion to accept this and pass it to the full board for approval. If anyone wants to make a motion, Ms. Porter or Mr. Mosher?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, thank you. So we have a motion to accept Ram's project and to send it on to the full board for approval. On the motion, Mr. Mosher,
Yes.
Ms. Porter,
Yes.
Mr. Guarino votes yes, so the motion carries. So, Ram, what we're going to do is, this is going to go to the full board. Probably, we have a meeting, I believe, in 2 weeks, and we'll probably approve it then. So, I just want to thank you for this. This is a great project, and it's going to do a lot of good for some students, and we appreciate that very much. So, good luck with it, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay, next on our agenda, excuse me, we have contract for athletic training for the Nashua School District and high schools. That would be Ms. Gingras.
Good evening. So we have before you, Mr. Donovan and I met with Jerry Holland, the head athletic trainer for the district and owner of Performance Rehab. Many of you may remember from our policy meeting a couple of weeks ago, Jerry and his business have worked with the school district for about 28 years and has done a phenomenal job with our programs, not just with our football teams, but with all of our student athletes. And we have before you an updated contract for the next 3 years. We are currently in a contract that ends at the end of this school year. So this contract is for the next 3 years. You will notice an increase in each of the 3 years, but I'd like to point out that if you go back through the past budgets, there has not been an increase in what we pay Performance Rehab for the past 7 years. They've been doing unbelievable work, as you know. More and more is asked of all of us every day and every year. So in the contract, it talks about the athletic trainers putting in 20 hours a week. I can attest personally that they are doing far more than that. So we are paying them for 20 hours a week, but they are putting in much, much more than that for our student athletes.
Mr. Donovan.
Yes, and back a few years ago, we did sort of not an official bid on athletic contracts,
Yes.
but we did Ms. Gingras did a review of what the other school districts in the area are doing for athletics. Some people hire their own staff, some people have other companies working for them. The level of quality, the amount of hours that we were getting for this price was very good. It really was. So the idea of, going out to bid, it's typically a good practice, but I think in this case, especially since Mr. Holland and his firm have not, while we were dealing with, 0.9 type budget increases and stuff, they did go 7 years without a raise. So I thought, and the service didn't wane at all. I think the service.
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not.
So I think this is a fair deal for all. We're getting people that have worked with us for a long time, done a very good job, and the increases are actually 2% and then 3% and 3%. So it's not like we're even really trying to catch up, by giving them 6 or 7% increases to catch up. It's just giving them something as we move forward.
Thank you, Mr. Donovan. I'm going to open it up to the members of the committee. I'm going to start with Mr. Mosher. Mr. Mosher, do you have, you must have all this material in front of you, the athletic training coverage contract?
Yes,
Okay, that's what we're discussing right now, sir. If you have any comments or questions.
I have everything in front of me, and I know, having been on F&O for some time, that we have always been very happy to do business with the company. So I'm all for it. I think it's a good idea. We should keep on with them and continue to enjoy their business.
Thank you, Mr. Mosher. Anyone else would like to speak to this? Ms. Porter?
I think that that's great that you have a relationship with them already, and if they've gone 7 years without an increase, this is more than fair.
I agree.
And I think they've paid their dues, they've waited, and I think that's a great idea, and if they're happy with that and you're happy with that, good.
Mrs. Oden, do you have any comments or questions regarding this issue?
No, I think it's fair, and I certainly appreciate the time they came to the policy committee meeting the other night. I thought it was very helpful, so thank you and thank them for what they do for our students. I thought it was extremely professional, so thank you.
I will. That's just one example of them going above and beyond for our kids.
Okay, at this time, I could entertain a motion to accept the athletic training coverage contract, August 2018 to June 2021, and send it to the full board for acceptance. Would anybody like to make a motion?
So moved.
I'll second it. Okay, on the motion, Mr. Mosher,
Yes.
Ms. Porter,
Yes.
Mr. Guarino votes yes, so the yeses have it, the motion carries. So that's going to be approved and sent to the full board for approval. You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next on our agenda, we have the results of the energy performance contracting, the RFP results, I believe. And I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Smith.
Okay, just I know you all weren't along for this entire journey. This actually started over a year ago when we sent out a request for qualifications for energy performance contracting. Briefly, that is a means by which you hire a company, generally they're an engineering company, and they do assessments of your schools for you and come up with a series of energy-saving measures. You, the Board of Ed, then get to choose which of those measures you're going to proceed with. They'll give you the full information. It's kind of an open book process. They'll, for example, just switch all the lights at one of the high schools over to LED. That's a very easy one. That's what they call low-hanging fruit, and has a very, very quick payback. But say we were replace the boilers with more efficient boilers, that payback would definitely be longer. And maybe may not make sense because the boilers are probably about midlife at this point. And the whole gamut. It can deal with lighting, it can deal with the motors, fans, insulation in the walls, the roof insulation, any of those things. It could be the addition of solar panels. You could have windmills on top of the high schools. It's the whole gamut. The Board of Ed at that point just agreed to try the process, but wanted to keep it just to the two high schools. And we had some preliminary assessments of the high schools done, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago, and there are good savings to be had, which I found surprising because to me the high schools were new. They are getting older now, but they're very well built. But they're quite sure we can have some savings. So they do that. You choose the energy performance, energy savings measures, and then it goes into a contract. And then the next thing that determines how is it funded. Do we pay out deferred maintenance? Do we go to the city for a bond? Is there a third-party financing possible? We'll get through that process. And the companies that we are proposing to deal with have all been through that process. They all had so with that RFQ that we did, we had 9 firms respond. 8 of them were we considered qualified. A lot of them were Fortune 500 companies. They had plenty of financial backing. They all had a lot of experience, and I made mention at that point I could probably be happy with any one of the 8 companies because they all had a decent background. But we went through the process, and this committee actually did the interviews, and we narrowed it to 3 firms. And those 3 were EEI, Honeywell, and Johnson Controls. And then this committee went with EEI as their first choice, and the administration basically agreed with that. Before it got to the full Board of Ed, one of the losing firms, I won't say which one, they kind of said, we disagree with you. And that was basically a phone conversation. It was followed up by an email from a regional manager that was a little more, a little stronger language. So we sent that to the city attorney for his interpretation. He came back to us. He actually talked to the full board, I think it was a non-public session, and recommended that we reinitiate the process all over again. So after some discussion, we just agreed that we'd go back to those 8 qualified firms, so we didn't have to repeat the whole process, which took the better part of a year. So in this case, I asked for an invitation for bid, and I was looking for key indicators of where the best deal could be had. And in the cover memo, I indicate, so I put out the bid on March 5th, bid documents, and the bids were due on the 28th. In this case, we received responses from just 4 of the 8 companies. So interestingly, numbers 2 and 3, one of which kind of protested, but not quite protested, chose not to bid this time. So how do you tell the different companies apart? The markup. So there's an attachment you hopefully have that's a spreadsheet. It shows the results of the bid requests and the markups for different ranges of projects, anywhere from $250,000 to $3 million. Those are just intended to be representative of the range we could be dealing with. I asked for what sort of markup they would impose on change orders. And then the other key indicator for me was what the cost for the audit. Oftentimes with this sort of process, you have the company do an audit for you, and if you proceed with the actual work, then you're not charged for the audit. But if you choose not to do anything at all, then they can bill you for it. And some examples, at least from the first round, were that audit may be $40,000. So it's kind of a risk for us to say we're going to proceed unless we really intend to proceed. So that's why that's out there. So and I kind of summarized that in the memo. So all 4 companies were provided qualified bids this time around. You can see the results. Amoresco's markups range from basically 30% up to 39%. Siemens was 45% across the board. Con Edison was 38.7 across the board. Energy EEI was 18%. And if you take a look at the change orders, Amoresco, they use the same numbers. Siemens was a little bit below their markup numbers for change orders, but Con Edison was the same, and EEI was also the same, so at 18%. There's one thing I wasn't quite sure, there was a 15% number that was thrown in there, and I'll figure that out when the time comes, what the difference was. So the other key thing, as I indicated, was the audit costs. So 2 of the companies indicated there would be a cost per square foot for the audit, and 2 said there was no cost whatsoever for that. Having gone through the process, we already checked references. We checked past projects they've done. We've looked at success they've had, how often they actually achieve the savings that they've suggested they will. One of the things they have to do, once we have that contract in place and there's a body of work for them to do, they, as part of that process, have to tell us how much we're going to save. And then they're held to that. So if we fail to reach that dollar amount, then they write us a check for the difference. So it just kind of takes the risk away from us quite a bit. Again, having already talked to all the references and looked at the past work, my first choice, the administration's first choice, the first round was EEI, and it is the first choice tonight as well. My recommendation would be to go with EEI for energy performance contracting.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Do you have anything, Mr. Donovan?
Yeah, I just want to mention that this is sort of for the district to have a partner looking at ways to save energy. We're not, by agreeing to this, we're not committing to spend a dime, actually. We're going to get an audit that we don't have to pay for. I'm sure EEI would like us to spend some money. We probably will. As Mr. Smith said, there's probably some low-hanging fruit where the return on the investment is very quick. It'll make a lot of sense in the world. And the other thing is, if there are some more significant spends, there's different ways you can go about paying for the improvements. So if we get to that point, we can bring that up more, but we could always get a bond and do it ourselves. There's usually, working with these firms, there's performance contracts where they're willing to get involved with the whole process. So the way I look at this is it's a great way for us to take a look, starting with our two high schools, at where we can basically save energy and therefore hopefully save some monies.
Thank you. I'm going to begin with Mr. Mosher for any comments or questions.
It sounds kind of complicated when you're dealing with so many companies. And I'm sure that Sean and our friend there who controls the purse strings, that they have done their due diligence in sorting out what is going to be best for the district in the way of equipment and cost. So I think that it's the idea is a good one, and I think that modernizing the system is going to be, I wouldn't say profitable in the end, but it will save us a considerable amount of money over the term. So I say yes, let's go for it.
Thank you, Mr. Mosher. Does anyone else have a question? Ms. Porter?
Thank you. I think it's incumbent upon us to try to save where we can. This is just a good idea. Everybody should be saving on energy or doing whatever they can, so I think this is great. If they were to do the audit, do you know when would that be?
Ideally for them, part of this is looking at the building envelope. And one of the ways you do that is you go outside in the wintertime with an infrared gun and looking for heat escaping. So this could be a long process. They probably can start fairly soon, but I would expect, you can also look for things in the summertime as well, but I wouldn't anticipate actual construction starting until a year from this summer.
Okay.
So they have some time to really do a good assessment and get back to us.
Okay, good.
Mrs. Oden?
Yes, as I look at these numbers, the three that are not in contention at this point, they're close to 39, 40%, and the top one's 45%. And this one, the energy efficient, is 50%, at least 50% cheaper than all the rest. And I'm just wondering why there is such a difference. Is it a new company looking for a new business, or is it, I don't understand. There's a large difference in the cost or in the numbers. So can anybody explain why the difference is so great?
Mr. Smith?
I can take a stab at it. So EEI is a subsidiary of E&E, which is a much bigger company, you know, the Fortune 500 sort, up in that level. So they're a small company, a local company. They're right up the road. They are headquartered in Merrimack, which was another advantage because they're right there. So my thought on it is they have much less overhead. They have a lot of good experience in the state of New Hampshire. Also, a lot of projects have had a successful conclusion. So they're just a smaller company, and I think it lies in the overhead.
Okay.
They happen to be in the audience if you wanted to query them directly, I suppose, but
Okay. Thank you.
If there aren't any more comments or questions, Mr. Smith, go ahead.
just one more thing. So part of this process and part of the coming up with a return on investment and reducing our cost is they will take full advantage of rebates. So we'll go back to Eversource, so we'll go back to Liberty, who provides our natural gas. At least they get it to us. And so that can be a significant savings as well. Like Sunset Heights, who we just finished, I think we got back in the order of, Mr. Donovan can correct me, it's probably about $40,000 total on that work. So a lot of it was LED lighting and use of variable frequency drives and things like that that reduced electricity use.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions or comments regarding this issue? I could entertain a motion to award the energy performance contracting work to EEI and forward the contract to the Board of Education for approval.
So moved.
And second?
On the motion, Mr. Mosher,
Yes.
Ms. Porter,
Yes.
Mr. Guarino votes yes. The motion carries. Thank you very much, Mr. Smith. Yes, sir.
I just thought of something else. Going back to Mrs. Oden's question. So one of the advantages they have, they've teamed with CTI, Control Technologies, who's pretty much our primary HVAC controls contractor for the Nashua. We employ two, one is Siemens and CTI is the other one. So they are in at least half, maybe 2/3 of our schools already. So part of the savings I would expect would come from their familiarity with our schools and their knowledge of where savings could be had. And so there's a little less of their time that's going to have to go into this just because of that reason.
Thanks. Okay. Moving right along, we have capital improvements program results. This is a very large document that is put out by the Planning Department in the City of Nashua as long-term, short-term programs and projects. It's a 6-year plan, capital improvements program. It was sent to us from the city, and it does have a number of school department projects on here. It's got some improvement projects, and it actually it has renovations for Elm Street. So this is a list of all the projects in the city with some school department projects. Would anyone like to speak to this?
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Donovan.
This is, I sort of put this in the package. I do it every year or two, and with some new members of the board, think of it as more of an educational thing. This is part of the planning process that the city uses. And I think one of the main reasons they use it is so that the people involved with making decisions on where we're going to spend our long-term bonding money, they have an idea of what the projects are. The last thing they want is a big surprise. Suddenly we need to put a roof on 3 different schools because we didn't prepare and stuff. So this is part of a process where every department gets together. They prepare their capital spending plan over a 5 or 6 year period. So that plan is typically put together by Mr. Smith. He and I review it. It's usually done in the fall of every year. We then bring that plan to the Board of Education. Typically at this committee, we usually do that in December of each year. And then the board approves it and says, okay, makes sense. They may have any questions answered regarding the items that we have on our list. And then we go, in January, we go in front of this group that prepares this report at City Hall. And we basically just explain our needs and our requests. And basically, typically we have two types of requests. We have what we call the larger bonded projects. In this case, what you'll see in here is the Elm Street project. And it also mentions the Fairgrounds Middle School roof, which we'll get to later. But, so it's typically the larger jobs. And as we've talked before, at this point in time, the 4 projects that are kind of kicking around is Elm Street, Mount Pleasant, Birch Hill, and Maine Dunstable. And I think we've, in Sean and my opinion, and I believe the superintendent, we sort of moved Elm to the front. I think that's where the biggest decision has to take place. So you'll be hearing more in the next month or so regarding Elm Street. But sort of back to this. So then each of the departments goes in front of this group. They then gather all the information, and then they put together this report. Now, they grade each one of the projects. And so A is the best, as you would get in school. And so if you take a look on page 13, there is the first school department project, which is the Mount Pleasant and Elm Street Middle School renovations. Now, sad to say, according to this group, we got a C. And they don't give D's and F's in this typically. They just give you a C. They're probably easy markers. So the reality is, though, simply because this group gives you a grade, that doesn't necessarily mean the city's going to take on the project in this level. This is just a recommendation by this group. On page 17, there is a school department. We got an A on this one. That's $610,000. Now, each year, Mr. Smith puts together approximately $600,000 worth of projects. Typically, it's made up of 6 to 10 different projects that make up the $600,000. These are items that are typically over $25,000 in cost to get done. The list of that is, I'm not sure if it's in the back here, but it's certainly in what we shared with the board back in December. This is what we call deferred maintenance. It's in the budget. It's not in the budget that the Board of Ed approves, but it's part of the operating budget that the city puts together. We've requested $600,000 since I've been here. We've ranged from $300,000 down to $100,000. The budget that the mayor, last year we got $200,000. The budget that the mayor has on the table with the alderman now has $100,000.
You requested 610, but they're giving you 100.
As of right
As
now,
of right now.
exactly.
Mm.
Now, Mr. Smith has been able to, when we've done projects at schools, take some of these projects that maybe if they related to Sunset and we did the project at Sunset, he was able to get those done as part of the large bonded project. So we've been able to do that. But the reality is, if we were trying to keep up with all the maintenance needs of 18, 19 buildings, we just don't get the funding to do that. So we end up bonding things. So do you want to speak to this a little too?
Sure. Yeah, I'm disappointed with 100,000. I'll get into that in a second. But if they give us $100,000 every year, we would never catch up. We'd fall behind. I think the total, I don't have it in front of me what the total deferred maintenance amount was, but say it was $8 million. I'll just use $10 million just for a nice round number. If we're only getting 100,000, I think it's 100, take 100 years to do all that work. And obviously you're going to be adding to that pile every single year because your roofs have a 25, 30 year lifespan, and same with any of our major systems. So I see us sliding backwards actually at the funding level we're at. I understand it. I know we've got budget concerns across the city, but I know for next year the board's already approved a $50,000 for midlife renovations of our chiller units, which air condition the 2 high schools. That's already been set aside. We've already accepted grants from the state for $400,000. Our piece of that is $80,000. I budgeted $40,000 in next year's deferred maintenance. So, so now I've got $10,000 to do something, and it's just the project list is just we're not touching it. So I expressed, maybe went around the chain of command a little bit, I'm sorry, but I talked to Rick Dowd a little bit on the side and says, I understand it's the mayor's budget, it's not the Board of Ed's budget, but it just isn't sustainable. We have to do something. And he's been a good advocate. He's been involved in all the construction projects, so I don't know if that's the proper route for us to follow from here or not. I'm willing to take the lead on that one with him if that's okay, but if you want to follow a more formal process, I'm good with that too.
Mr. Mosher, do you have any comments regarding the capital improvements program?
I've been reviewing the thing over the past week, and I think it's just a shame that we can't get the money to catch up on some of these things. But I know Sean is going to do the best he can, and if we can combine it with some of the other improvements that we want to make, I think that's a smart way to go.
Thank you, Mr. Mosher. Does anyone else have a comment or question regarding the capital improvements program? Go ahead, Mr. Smith.
So this past year we finished Sunset Heights renovation, and the last 2 were pretty comprehensive renovations. We added to the buildings a little bit. We added mechanical rooms. We actually got a fresh paint job. A lot of mechanical, electrical things were changed. The 3 schools before that were done were Charlotte, Ledge, and Fairgrounds. Those were primarily mechanical, electrical in nature. But how we arrived at that point, Mr. Dunham and I put our heads together 8 years ago or so. How are we going to get the stuff done? Because the deferred maintenance money just isn't coming in. So we just did a sort of the spreadsheet. And lo and behold, there's $3 million here for Fairgrounds and $3 million for Charlotte. And that's kind of how we ended up getting into the bonding business again. Because the last bonded project before those, that was 2010, I think, were the 2 high schools. And it's kind of a move out of desperation because we weren't getting the money any other way. But the city somehow seems to be willing to bond. It's a good interest rate at this point, so that seems to be our recourse.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Ms. Porter.
So if you can work with Mr. Dowd, I don't see a problem with that because you both have the same goal in mind. You want what's best, and that's disturbing to have be in such a hole with regular ongoing maintenance. So whatever you can do, I think I'm for.
Thank Mr. Donovan.
Yeah, basically because of the nature of the budget, if you think of it, compare it to your own home, what the city's effectively doing is taking out home equity loans to pay for things that if you were more financially secure, you would use your paycheck funds, let's say, to keep up work on your house. If a window broke, you wouldn't borrow money, you just fix the window. You know, you might borrow money to put a whole new roof on your house. So what in effect we've done is, okay, we'll borrow money to put the roof, but then to fix the window and to all these other things that aren't getting done, we're sort of rolling up into one bond. So it's not the best way to do it, but with interest rates being low, they've started to rise, so I'm not sure if it's, you know, long-term going to continue to be the way to do it. But the city is in strong financial position as far as the bonding companies are concerned, so we do get good rates, and that's how we've been able to do it. But if we do see the interest rates rise, then it could be an interesting process. And it's not like, I think a lot of the people that have been around for a while on the Board of Aldermen, involved with projects like Alderman Dowd and Alderman McCarthy, they're very familiar with this. They know that there's an issue here. So it's just a matter of trying to manage it at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Donovan. Ms. Porter.
So on any of these things that aren't getting done, are there safety issues involved? Like, is there any maintenance that's not getting done that could be unsafe?
I'd want to look at the list I have, if I don't have it in front of me, but some of the, well, take security, is that a safety issue?
I know.
Yeah, and I think we're taking we're doing the things we have to do. We could always use more money and make things more safer. You had a presentation last night. We could spend $5 million if you gave it to us and make things safer, but.
Well, like with air handlers and like,
Yeah, well,
that air quality? Or?
It affects air quality, certainly it does. We had to put the money in the chillers because they were starting to fail and they were only midlife.
Right. I guess a health issue would maybe be a better way to say it than a safety issue. I mean, the air. Okay.
Mr. Mosher, do you have any more comments or questions?
Yeah, I had pardon me, I just hit the wrong button there.
Oh, that's okay.
I had some further comments.
Sure, go ahead. Yep.
Saved some money on the air conditioning and project that we did in Mount Pleasant, and I know we constantly looking around. Excuse me, to see what we can combine together and get by with the money that we have. And of course, with the bonding, if the rates do go up substantially, that could be problematic. So we have to take a look and prioritize what the things that are absolutely necessary, and to devise a plan on how we're going to spread that out. Some of that done. I have a lot of confidence in Sean. I know he does very well with that, and when he's in the contemplation mode, don't interrupt him, because he needs all the brain power that he can get to take care of our 17 schools and keep everything running on top schedule. So yeah, it's a weighty problem, but we've got to be careful because we see the light at the end of the tunnel. We have to make sure it's not a train.
Right.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Porter.
With respect to the air conditioning at Mount Pleasant, I would personally like to say thank you. I know that when these are written on a piece of paper, maybe you don't hear about how that affects the people who are on the receiving end of this work. My classroom was on the 3rd floor, and it was just not sustainable. That air conditioning was life-changing. I'm not overstating when I say that. Kids now have that air conditioning. They're able to learn. They're able to be comfortable. Before we had that air conditioning, you couldn't learn. It was just too hot, and we would have to scramble whenever there was, if the computer lab was empty, that was air conditioned, and we'd be taking turns to go down there and bring our class or go outside. So these improvements are so important, and they do have a direct impact on the learning that's happening at school. So that's the one that I had the most experience with, and I don't want you to think I'm overstating. When I say life-changing, it really was. So thank you, and that was a great use of money, and we really appreciate it.
Yeah. If you think about it, if I could, just Elm Street's kind of in a similar situation. You know, the kids are a little bit older, but they're still, especially on the top floor, it gets pretty hot up there. There is no air conditioning, and there's insufficient air movement as well.
Right.
Because when that school was built, and then even when it was renovated, the building codes and the cubic feet per minute that were supplied for each child and staff member were much lesser than they are now. Than any schools that were built during the energy crunch. You know, think back to when you were waiting in the gas pump. Back in those days, they really scrunched down on that CFM number. Yeah, so Elm Street is, there's all sorts of reasons to renovate Elm Street next.
Oh, people get sick. It's too hot. They would drop like flies. And so if Elm Street needs that, I get it.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Porter. Mr. Donovan?
Yeah, just one more thing. We do have a project this summer, which is the roof at Fairgrounds Middle, correct?
Yes.
That's interestingly in here, listed as a B, but it's getting done this summer, so it probably should have been an A. But just to let you know that the lettering of that doesn't really matter. It's where it sort of fits in. So that is a project that we will get done because that roof was in pretty bad shape.
Yeah, so we're doing that. We're also relighting the entire school, so it's going to be LED, which this board's already familiar with. We already approved that. So on the tail of that, they did rate very highly purchasing and building a new school administration building. I believe in that report, it's rated a A or something like that. Also relocate the Brentwood, and we're not doing really either one of those. We're moving to Brentwood, but it's mainly a rental cost and a little bit of wall building on our part.
Thank you, Mr. Smith and Mr. Donovan. I appreciate all your hard work that you put into this. And so when we've passed a budget, and at some point in time, I guess in May, the school department, I assume the superintendent, is going to go to City Hall and articulate that budget. And I hope that, I'm sure that both of you are going to work with the superintendent and also, because this is not in the budget, this is something that's sort of extra, but we also need to articulate that they can't, that all things are connected. In fact, I have that deferred maintenance capital improvements plan that you do. I have it. I don't have it with me, but I know exactly what you're talking about. Everything is connected. The issues of going to school in May 20, now we're up to May 22nd, I'm sorry, June 22nd, June 25th, and that's all connected because you have on your deferred maintenance plan, the capital improvements, you have, I know there's a couple of schools that you want to get done. If they start shortchanging us, that's never going to get done. So I just want people to understand this is the bind that we're in. We want to take care of these things. So now, the superintendent doesn't get caught up in these big issues about going to school June 22nd, June 25th, when it's really hot. Now at least we'll have the air conditioning, but we can't get the air conditioning because now the capital improvements number that we're looking for, that we get every year, was just barely doing it, and they're shortchanging us. So everything is connected. Nothing. Everything is connected in that sense. So I'm going to move on and stop talking. So I'm going to move on to single audit. I'm going to give the floor to Mr. Donovan.
Okay. This, once again, is just more of an informational thing to sort of let people know some of the work that's done on the financial side of things. The city and the school department go through this audit every year. We call it the single audit. And basically what they're doing is they're reviewing all of our grants, our grants that we have with the state and federal government. Typically, when they go they'll go through this process, and then this is the report they prepare. We then take this report, send it up to the state, because the state's the one that manages the grants for us, and they want to make sure that someone has gone in, reviewed that what we're spending the money on is correct, we're keeping accurate records, et cetera. So each year we've gone through this. The results have been good. I'd like to give kudos to Glennis Chappett, who deals with the grants in the school district. She does a very good job. So just a few highlights on here. There's a lot of accounting speak in here, which I wouldn't worry about a lot of that. But basically, to take a look at the monies that the school district gets in the way of grants, if you look on page 6, you'll see the listing. In the top first, you'll see the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and you see a total there of $3.238 million. That is the food service. So that's the grant we get for our food service. That's typically about 50% of the revenue we get to run our food service. So that's what we get from the grant. The other 50% of the revenue comes from people that pay for lunches. Those two funds come together, and then the costs that we incur for labor and food and everything else to run the department are offset by this. We're able to make a profit, not a big one, but most years we're able to keep a small profit. So we've been able to keep this outside of the operating budget. So when you look at the operating budget, you won't notice any costs related to this, because think of this as a little small business. So that's why it's really important that we run it like a business, and we keep the costs controlled. But we're able to do that partially because of the grant from the federal government. And then on page 7, under U.S. Department of Education, there's where you'll see the rest of the grants that we have. Because a lot of people will say, well, your operating budget's $110 million. That's $110 million. You add on the benefits, which is another $35 million or $40 million. Then there's also monies we spend in our district, or these grant funds that we've been typically getting each year. So if you look at the list, the first couple, the special education, that's the IDEA grants. So those funds, the $2.7 million there, those are funds we spend on our special education programs. Then there's the other large ones. I won't mention all of them, but there's the Title I grant, the 3.392. That's the Title I grant. Those are at the 5 Title I schools. A lot of that is teachers that we pay to work with students in those schools. The next one down, the Career and Technical, that's the Perkins grant, and that's used as for the CTE funds. The $378,000, that's our 21st Century program, our after-school program that we have. Then there's the ELL grant, that's $160,000. And then there's the other large one, that's the Title II, the $743,000. So those are all the grant funds that we get. As I said, most of them from the Department of Education. They're managed through the state, but they're actually federal funds. So with federal funds, you're required to do the audit. That's what this audit is all about. We do, we also have an audit of all our accounting activities citywide. That's done separately. This is a separate audit. So I just wanted to bring it forward. If you look on page 9, you can basically see, most of the boxes are checked in the right places. Any material weaknesses identified? No. Any significant deficiencies? No. And basically, when they come and do the audit, any grant over $750,000 is actually audited. So some of the small ones, they don't really spend the time auditing. They can if they choose. And the only finding that they came up with is they would like and it's going to be done citywide, they'd like some more policies documented based on some changes that have been made. So basically the city will work on that. They'll send it to us. We'll take a look at it. But the city accounting department is going to be responsible for doing that. So all in all, a good job for the people involved with the grants, and gives you a sense of where some of the other funds that we use to run our school district come from.
Thank you, Mr. Donovan. I'm going to start with Mr. Mosher. Do you have any questions or comments, sir?
Well, not really. I look at all the paperwork, and I think that what we get, we make good use out of, especially the Perkins grants. But we could get better use out of it if we can get those machines up and running with a lot of student hands on there learning the mechanics. My comment was I was listening to about the air conditioning in Mount Pleasant and being familiar with the equipment that came from Train and how to best utilize it to get everything working. And even though the equipment is isolated from being in the school by being up on the roof, where it does not interfere with the architectural nature of the neighborhood, I think we're doing good for what we got. And I got to hand it to our staff there that they are doing a good job.
Thank you, Mr. Mosher. Does anyone else have any questions or comments? Ms. Porter?
I'll just again say thank you for all this hard work. This is quite a bit of detail, and I can imagine the number of hours that went into it for many people. Thank you. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Donovan. So we're going to move on to the March fiscal year 2018 transfer report. Mr. Donovan?
Yes, only one entry. This doesn't necessarily have to be approved. As we've said before, if it's over $5,000, the board needs to approve it. If it's between $1,000 and $5,000, it's just done for informational purposes. You will start to see more of these entries, I believe, as we tend to see a lot towards the end of the year as people start to move funds around. But the only one in the month of March was done by the Lisa Gingras, actually, for the Nashua Athletics. She was moving money from her, where she had probably over budgeted in the telephone line, and she's moving it to rental to cover the ski team rental lines. They were lower than budgeted. So all this is really doing is just bringing in the budget in line with the actual costs.
Thank you, Mr. Donovan. Unless anyone has a question or comment, I'm going to move on to the March financial report. Mr. Donovan?
Okay, I'll run through this. I just highlight a few things to let everyone know. Next month, I should have the forecast for this year. The forecast is the interesting part of each year where we take a look and say, okay, are we going to actually make the budget? It's been very close the last 3 years. I think we've had combined the last 3 years, we probably had about $16,000 in excess when you're talking about $300 million in budget. So it's been very, very tight. So that process will start. I just got my first information on year-to-date payroll figures from the city, and I'll start working with that. So next month we'll have some real actuals versus my forecast, and hopefully it'll be good news. But just to run through this first, if you look on page 1 of the first budget, as we've said before, most of the funds, 80% of our budget that we have control over is the salaries and wages. So if you look at the wages full-time, the number this month is 8.447. Typically that number's down about 6.3. So you say, why would it be so much higher? The month of March, there were 3 biweekly payrolls and there were 5 weekly payrolls. Typically, you have 2 biweekly payrolls and 4 weekly payrolls. Okay, so last year it was also, to be honest, I went back and looked at last year. Last year it was about 8.55 million in the month of March because the same thing happened. It probably next year, I think it won't happen. It might slide to April, but so that number, even though it's high, is reasonable based on the number of payrolls. The overtime number is down a little bit from last month, though it looks like we're certainly going to end up overspending. If you take a look, there's only about 26,000 left. Now, there will be some relief from this account in that some of the overtime for Biddy basketball, that's currently charged to this account. We get to take it out of this account and charge it to the Park Rec Department. That's typically around 30,000 or so. So typically that could be another month. So though I think this account, the overtime account, will run over, it won't be as bad as it potentially looks right now. Okay, the wages per diem, those are the subs. The month of March, it's a long month, so that's the highest it's been this year, but typically you start to, on the longer months, it's not way out of whack, it's kind of where we were last year. Wages elected officials, since we saved $1,000 because we had one less person. But now we have someone new, so we're not going to save it, unless, of course, she decides to give it back. But I'm not counting on that. Okay, longevity. Now, you'll notice that there's a negative number there. I think I mentioned last month, back in January, when the city paid the longevity payments to most of the groups, they double paid a lot of the people in error. So city payroll's gone back. I think we're down to 5 people that have not either paid it back or committed to pay it back. I actually contacted those 5 people personally today. So hopefully we can wrap that up. I'm not sure why they've waited this long, but hopefully we'll clear it up soon. So that should settle out. We should get most of that back, and then I think the longevity will be fine. Additional hours, small amount this month. The stipends is a large number this month, and it's got a few things. It's got about 100,000 of that is the winter coaches. We're all paid, so the middle school and high school winter coaches is about $100,000 in total. The para contract also they have a $250 stipend that they get once a year. It's most of the paras have been around for a while. New paras don't get this, but the older ones do. And that's about $70,000. So that payment was made in the month of March. So if you take that and you put it with the other stipends for the head teachers and the monthly stipends, that's why that number's $190. So all those things are in the budget. We shouldn't have an issue. The retirements and separations pay, as you can see, that's over budget. We sort of knew it was going to be over budget. A lot of that is because we've had a lot of turnover in our administrative groups. So we typically know when we put the budget together how many teachers are retiring because they need to tell us by a certain date, February 1st. Administrators don't have to do that, so and also, when you have a lot of turnover, this account also, anybody that has vacation that they didn't use if they leave, even if they hadn't been here a long time, they might have saved up a couple of weeks' vacation. When they leave, they get paid that gets charged to this account too. So the more turnover, the more lump sum payments you're going to have. So hopefully that will start to slow down. So all in all, there's some big numbers there, but I think we feel pretty comfortable about that. Okay, the fringe benefits, like I said, that's pretty much city numbers. Any extra money we have in that account goes back to the city. If those accounts are overrun, the city will pick up the difference, so there's really not much of a concern for us as a school department in those accounts. Except for the educational assistance is our account, and that's in fine shape now. That professional and technical services, nothing too crazy to look at there. Things are moving along fine. Okay, property services. This is one area that typically I hope to have some savings in the electricity and the heating gas. So comparing so we're through 9 months. Last year, the electricity at this point in time was $1,428,000. As you can see, this year we're $1,333,000. So we're $95,000 less in electricity. So I think we're starting to see some of those savings, A, in locking in a low rate, and then B, some of the savings we put in by fixing the schools and putting in more efficient things. So I'm hoping we'll have some savings in that. The heating gas, if we ever find spring, maybe we will get some savings. We also have some good rates on heating gas. We're closer to where we were last year. Last year we had spent $549 at this point versus $519, so that's about $30,000 difference. But with I think the cold March and cold early April, I'm not sure if we're going to see that much more savings, but I'm certainly sure we'll end up below what we have budgeted, which is the $981,000 now. And then water, a much smaller account, but it's pretty much online with where we were last year, which is sort of what we expect. Okay, property services on page 2. The HVAC maintenance, that's a quarterly payment, the $34,693. Mr. Smith spoke to that. What we do with the HVAC is we set up annual maintenance contracts with the two vendors, Siemens and Control Technologies, so that's the payment for the third quarter. Other than that, things look okay. The other services, the telephone account is actually slightly higher than last year. We were hoping it would be slightly lower with the new phone system, so we really haven't seen any savings from the new phone system yet. We're hoping those will accrue soon. But either way, if we take the two telephone lines together, it should be pretty close to budget. The only account, well, in the top, the advertising is once again run over budget. We probably should budget higher, but when you go back and look with the change in, we had a couple of principals we had to advertise for, we have a CTE director, so that's where we usually spend the money on. The more, let's say, senior administrative positions is where you spend money. We don't spend lots of money on finding teachers, but we do advertise our teacher fair, but other than that, most of the money from advertising comes when we're advertising for more senior administrative type positions. Okay, towards the bottom there, you see the larger numbers, the regular transportation and sped transportation. I'll have more, those accounts both are looking fine right now. I'll have more detail as I do my forecast, because I'll forecast those out over the next few months next time. And then there's the tuition out of district. As I've said, that's my concern. We're certainly going to overrun what we have in the budget here. You can see for the month it was $448,000, which leaves us with $619,000 remaining. $619,000 is slightly more than 1 month. So basically, when we get to the end of April, this count is going to be pretty much dried up. We do have a special revenue fund that we can put some money towards for the month of May. And then for the month of June, the mechanics is I'm going to have to hopefully find some extra money and transfer some money from other accounts to pay for this, because this is going to certainly not have enough money in it when it gets to June. So that's kind of the sort of the challenge going forward. It has been the last couple of years. It will be again. It probably will be next year too, because all we did was really increase it by a couple $100,000. If we have a weakness in our operating budget, it's this line item. Okay.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
Probably a dumb question, but...
No questions are dumb.
When we moved Brentwood, right, I guess our special ed students, there's a big variety of what their reason why they're special ed. But I was wondering if we move Brentwood, would that change the status of some of them, that they could be dealt with locally? And we wouldn't be sending as many out, or is that not possible because they're what they need, their needs are all different, and we have to send them out?
Well, I think the idea with Brentwood was typically, speaking to the special ed staff, once a student is out of district and they're at a specific school, it's very difficult to move them, especially if they're happy in that school. Okay. A lot of students, most of the students that we send out of district, we send to one place, they stay there rest of their time with us at that one school. There's a few kids that move around multiple schools. But for the most part, those students, once they're at the school, it's really hard to move them. The hope with Brentwood is that we can either bring in some other people from other districts, and then they would sort of pay us, and typically the tuition's around $40,000, so that would make some funds available for this. Or the other thing is that we would, instead of sending them to an out-of-district, we'd send them to Brentwood. But that population is pretty much 8th through 12th grade. Mm-hmm. Though, to be honest with you, most of the students that are out of district are older. Mm-hmm.
I think I just don't know there's probably a real variety of needs, and it's just not possible, and I just don't know what those needs are. But
yeah, there are many, many different needs.
Yeah,
some kids have multiple needs, some have more specific needs.
Right.
And the thing about a lot of these out-of-district placements, a lot of them are specialized in certain things.
Right.
So,
thank you.
Okay, supplies and materials. These are the things that are managed mostly by the schools. This is where they have most of their, between the schools and Mr. Smith. Mr. Smith has sort of the electrical, plumbing, HVAC, all those things, and the schools, sort of the educational supplies and the office supplies and stuff. The way our system's set up, we're not going to overrun any of these accounts because you can't spend it if the money isn't in the budget. So I'm never typically too concerned. The only note here is on that 61875, the books account. You'll see there was $53,000. That was for the last purchase of the geometry books that were approved at the end of last year. Okay, the indirect cost, you see that negative number, that's a good thing. We want a negative number. We're hoping to see more entries in there. What that is with our grants, we get for managing the grants, we get a certain percentage back, an overhead rate, so to speak, which is typically between 2 and 3%. It's given each year. I think it's 2.3% this year. So some of the grants we can do this. We can't do it for all of the grants, but we budgeted 125. We've already got 84, and I think at the end of April you'll see that number get closer to that 125, and then hopefully there'll be some excess in there at the end of the year. And then the equipment accounts, they're in pretty good shape. There is a negative number if you look in the year to date for computer equipment, but really that is the curriculum department. Basically, they budgeted in miscellaneous equipment, and then they bought computer equipment. So we don't typically make them do a transfer. So if it's within the same digits, so if they're both in the they both start with 71. So that's why it's a negative number, but they don't have the ability to spend any more than that. And then that's pretty much it. Brings you to the end. So, like I said, next month we'll have our first shot at the forecast, and I'll either be in a good mood or I won't be.
Thank you very much, Mr. Donovan. That is a lot. That's a lot to digest. I appreciate your hard work. I'm going to ask Mr. Mosher if he has any more comments or questions.
Yeah, actually, no. I think Dan has covered it very well. I don't have any questions, and everything seems to be in tip-top shape, more or less. And I think we're ready to go and let him do his forecast.
Thank you, Mr. Mosher. Ms. Porter?
Yeah, thank you again. That was really enlightening. I learned a lot. Thank you. That explained a lot of things, and we're doing all right. Thank you.
Mrs. Oden?
No, thank you.
In that case, I think we're all done. Thank you once again. I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Seconded.
Second.
On the motion to adjourn, Mr. Mosher?
Yes.
Ms. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Guarino votes yes. This meeting is adjourned at 7:55.
And that's all she said.